Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our last PloCC seminar talk for this year, because it's December. For those of you who are not so aware of PloCC, PloCC is a Places of Climate Change research center, and we organize regular research seminars and also hold meetings around the topic of places of climate change, basically looking at how people engage with climate change based on their local connections, place attachment, and based on the idea that if we want to make a change regarding climate change, then we have to do it locally. So that's the motivation for all of this. And Sofie is going to talk about her recent project in this respect, and I'm just going to briefly introduce her. So Dr. Sofie Roberts is a research officer at Bangor University. She works at the Center for Health Economics and Medicine's Evaluation at the moment, and is interested in nature-based solutions to planetary and public health and well-being. Her recent projects have been evaluating community perceptions and involvement in climate projects, aiming at low carbon emissions and environmental sustainability, and she has a background in the low carbon sector. She is a management board member of the Places of Climate Change Research Center at Bangor University and is a Welsh speaker from the foothills of Eryri. So over to you, Sofie, and I'm looking forward to your talk.
Oh, diolch, Tora. Right, I'll try and share my screen again. Okay, can anybody shout if they can see that properly?
Yeah, that looks perfect, thank you.
Diolch, Tora, and diolch for the introduction. So yeah, my name's Sofie, and I'm a research officer here at Bangor University. And I'm going to talk a little bit about two of the projects over the last year, which I was the postdoc research assistant on, and they were led by Professor Tora Tembrink, who is chairing today, either as the PI or the co-I on these studies. And our research was, and it still is, grounded in the notion of place attachment, which Tora briefly mentioned at the beginning. That, yeah, while climate change happens globally, it really is felt on a local level where we live and where we care about. And these are some of the things that we were looking into in these two projects. So today I'm going to talk about two projects. So the findings of the Low Carbon Energy and Environment Research Network Wales project, or the LCEE one, the Reclaim Network Plus project. And the Reclaim Network is sort of a one-stop shop, I think they call themselves, about green and blue infrastructure. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we could generalise some of these findings and possible future research avenues. So for the first project, we're going to focus on Gwyrddni, which is a grassroots movement. And we've got Grant Paisley, who runs Gwyrddni, and the director of DEG in the audience today. The Reclaim project was in Denbighshire County Council. So different to Gwyrddni, which is grassroots and bottom-up, the Reclaim project looked at Denbighshire County Council's interventions, which are obviously top-down. And then I'm going to look at some of the key factors that we can take from both projects. So we'll start with Gwyrddni, and I just thought I'd share a little bit of information about Gwyrddni itself before we kicked off, in case somebody isn't familiar with what Gwyrddni is or what Gwyrddni does. And I've just taken their information from their website so I don't mess it up. So yeah, it's a community-based, community-led climate action movement that brings people together in 5 areas of Gwynedd to discuss, share and act locally to tackle climate change. And so what we did in the project that looked into Gwyrddni and what they were doing was to analyse or study their community assemblies. And in 2022 and 2023, Gwyrddni hosted community assemblies on the climate in 5 areas. I think they brought together 50 people from each of the 5 areas over 4 sessions. So that's 20 assemblies with hundreds of people discussing what local climate actions they could take in their communities, just to make things better, essentially. And it followed the same model as normal. You might have heard of citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, deliberative democracies. They're all sort of the same model, usually facilitated, and it's just people that come together, possibly nationally representative sample of as close as you can do, just to get everybody's views and opinions and how they can work together to come up with an action plan and or solutions. And that's what happened in Gwyrdni. So after the 20 assemblies, each of the 5 areas came up with an action plan to take forward with phase 2 of Gwyrdni funding. And I believe that's been kicking off since this summer now, but maybe Grant can correct me later on if I've got that wrong. So these action plans are now being set in motion, and the communities are delivering on what they'd agreed on during the assemblies. So our project, the LCEE project, was called Enhancing Community Involvement in Low Carbon Projects, a study of North West Wales climate assemblies. And we had 3 key research questions, which you should be able to see on the screen now. So the first one was looking at how to achieve representative membership, including marginalised groups that are reluctant to engage, something that several studies has pointed at being very difficult and no solutions have been readily available. Our second one was looking into how to conduct assembly meetings to make sure that everybody got heard, and recognising everybody, different perspectives, languages or conceptual backgrounds. And our third area was thinking about place attachment and considering, the specifics of an area and, the hyperlocal ecosystems, their community discourses, and examining what might work in one of the communities of Gwyrdni, whether that would work across all of them, and is that generalisable to Wales, the UK, or is it very hyperlocal? So we're looking at all these 3 main things, really. But for today's talk, I'm really going to talk a bit more about research question 1 and 3, because what we found for the second one was that facilitation is key. Gwyrdni had trained facilitators, their community facilitators were doing that as well as, and they'd been on, proper training. They set out principles at the beginning that people adhered to, and that worked really, really well. Other studies have pointed at the same sort of thing, really, that facilitation is key. So we didn't find anything super new there. But we did find quite interesting things as regards question 1 and 3. And the top finding I've put on the slide, that while those engaged are very concerned about climate matters, what we found is that they're often equally or more concerned about other matters. And in this case, it was their cultural and linguistic heritage, which we didn't necessarily expect to be as strong, but it was an interesting fact. And I think that what we found with this engagement obviously would help as regards achieving representative membership, or those that are more reluctant to engage, because that they might engage not just because of climate matters, but because they're concerned about other things that also tap into that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And what we also found, thinking about question 3 that's on the slide, is that in Gwyrdni's case, some of these communities are less than 10 miles away. So one of them is Bethesda area, the other one is where I live in Dyffryn Peris. It's like a 15-minute drive, 10 miles away. But there was quite a big differences in, the dynamics, in what really mattered to people. So you've got to really think about what works for one community may and doesn't work elsewhere. And that's even communities within the same county. So yeah, these really localized discourses came through really strongly when I was taking part in sitting in some of these assemblies. But again, I'll discuss that a little bit more again in a bit. So as I sat in one of these assemblies, it was in Dyffryn Nantlla in Pen y Groes, I noticed that there was a really long discussion about language, about the Welsh language, which took about, oh, I'm not even exaggerating in saying about an hour, in which the group was just really discussing the importance of Welsh language, and that it shouldn't just be a part of their climate action plans, but it should really be like an anchor point, that everything that they do that's good for the environment should also be good for the Welsh language. And something I didn't mention at the beginning was that the Gwyrddni movement is completely bilingual and Welsh first. So the assemblies were bilingual with simultaneous translation for those who couldn't speak Welsh. And the majority, I think, of participants, it was like a 50-50 split, I think, in most places between Welsh and English speakers. So quite different to many other examples of citizens' assemblies, community assemblies, whatever you want to call them, in that they're normally in the UK, of course, just in one language, in English. But in this one, it was a bilingual one. So that's something that is really understudied as well, about the role of language. But what so we found that, that language was really important. But then we went back to some of the data that CAST had gathered before the assemblies, and CAST is the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations, and they'd sent a survey to those that had signed up to the assemblies before, just to gather their thoughts so that they could map during and after to see if anybody's thoughts changed, and the long-lasting impact of taking part in a process such as this one. And it kind of sheds a bit more light on what we saw, on the ground by taking part in the assemblies and sitting in, and it underpins what I found, because what I saw is, if we think about place attachment first, that 93% agreed that addressing the climate emergency is important, and 93% agreed that the landscape and countryside of that area is important to them. So there's a higher than national average agreeing with climate change here. I think the national average is about 80%. So those that self-selected to take part in the Gwyrddni process were obviously higher than that, but it does make sense that people are generally engaged and want to take part, would think that climate emergency is important. But they were, their place attachment came through quite quickly in the questionnaire as well, with a high percentage agreeing that the countryside of their area is important to them. And statements that were about place returned more of a strong agreement than other matters, such as care for the community, care for environment, connection with people, and supporting the economy. All of these things were also important, but they weren't as high as 93% that landscape and countryside returned. But more interesting, oh, it's not moving, there we go, is the Welsh language respondents. So the questionnaire went out in English and in Welsh, and I think it returned about near enough 50-50 responses, about 100 in Welsh and about 100 in English. So when we look at the data from the Welsh language survey, and the question was, which of these issues are extremely important to you personally? 66% said climate change, 66% said biodiversity and the destruction of wildlife or nature, but 96% said the Welsh language. So that kind of corroborates what I saw when I went to the Frenanza and witnessed this really, passionate debate about where the Welsh language should sit in climate responses. Because, so we see that they're interested in climate, but they're extremely interested in the Welsh language as well. And it seemed to us as though participants appear to engage with climate action sort of as tackling the bigger picture of what really mattered to them. So in this particular instance, it was the sustainability of the home patch, and that was connected to both climate and language. And understanding this sort of localized discourse and the things that really matter to people in this particular place can really make a difference to engagement, because you're not going to be just going at people about the climate. You're going to be going at people about the sustainability of their place and the things that they care about, you know, their culture, their heritage, and where they live. And if we go on a little bit more, so we found all these things about language, about place, but it wasn't just us that sort of found that, because the attendees, the participants in the Gwyrddni process, put those right into their action plans themselves. And that's nothing to do with me. So the action plans came about after the 4 assembly sittings for each location, and I've just put some of their action plan guidelines and values on the screen. And you'll see I've circled or put a yellow square around some of the parts, and they all point at language. So in the Frymperis, we've got that they want to support culture, language, diversity, creativity, access and equality as part of their climate action plan. In the Ffrynanlla, I think that's the Ffrynanlla, I've got the thing over it, oh, the Ffryn Ogwen, sorry. It says that, yeah, all actions should be accessible and inclusive, but yeah, last but not least, the Welsh language should always be included in any and all actions. Oh. And the Ffrynanlla, the same. They put where there's an impact on the Welsh language, it must be a positive one. So this is directly from the conversation that I saw happen on, I think it was their second sitting, their second assembly meeting, where they not only wanted the Welsh language to be included, they wanted, you know, a positive impact. And Bro Ffestiniog, they also mention, they don't mention language directly in theirs, and that's a separate conversation, I think, because of the way in which they had a community facilitator that was a second language Welsh speaker. So we don't know whether they were just being a bit more polite towards her, that they don't want to emphasise language as much. We don't know. But, you know, the cultural well-being of the community is still emphasised. And the final action plan was Pensions, which wasn't published when I originally put these slides together, but it has since been published, and they used the same guidelines as the Frymperis for their language statement, which exactly the same wording of supporting culture, language, diversity, creativity, access and equality. So if we're thinking about the key findings of the LCE project, we've kind of developed a new research question as a result of it, essentially. And that research question is, what are the key heritage and cultural factors that motivate individuals and communities in different areas across the UK to engage towards environmental sustainability? And in North West Wales, we found it was linguistic and cultural Welsh identity, hiraeth, so that sense of belonging, that that doesn't have a perfectly translatable word, and place attachment. So I'm going to revisit this towards the end of the talk, because we'll discuss a little bit about this in the second project as well. So this research question, we have done a small survey across the UK, just to try and capture some of the heritage and cultural factors that motivate people elsewhere. And hopefully there'll be another project at some point that can expand on what we sort of found in the Gwyrddni project, and see, yeah, and answer that question a lot more fully. So that's that one. So now I'm going to talk about the second project that we did. So that this one launched in December last year, and we've nearly finished putting together the report now before it goes into journal papers. So this project was called Community Perceptions of New Green Space Interventions and a Case Study in Rhyl of North Wales. And this one was a collaborative project between the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology and Denbighshire County Council. And we had 4 key aims. So the first one was to measure and model a suite of benefits of planned green infrastructure, so GI interventions in Rhyl, which is a deprived area, and the GI in question in this project was planting new trees and establishing wildflower meadows. So the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology led on that work package, and then we at Bangor University looked at more the social data. So we wanted to understand residents' perspectives of GI and compare those Rhyl residents' perspectives with perspectives from across the UK. We wanted to evaluate the effect of providing information about benefits on perceptions and engagement. So whether giving people more information about the good things that happen if you plant more trees or establish wildflower meadows, whether that had an impact on acceptability, whether people liked them more if they knew more about the benefits, or whether it made no difference at all. And the purpose is, to synthesize the findings into policy-focused guidance, and eventually we'll have some articles, hopefully. So I'll talk a little bit about what UK CEH did first at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So they wanted to measure and model a suite of benefits, and they did this by running 5 ecosystem service models that were developed for urban settings. Those models were air pollution, noise mitigation, carbon storage, flood protection, and urban cooling. And I've also included the land surface temperature map that they've developed that just shows Rhyl, really. And we had a second image that didn't have trees, and one that did, just to show, the difference, the real difference that lots of trees can do. And you'll see from the red box on the slide as well that the tree cover in Rhyl is quite low. It's a small place, it's a small coastal town. Very few trees in the city centre, more trees focused towards the outskirts in the residential areas. But people did notice this, and it's something I'll mention a bit later on. They really did notice that there weren't loads of trees in Rhyl. So that's something that it was just common awareness, I guess, of the residents when you spoke with them. They knew exactly where there were few trees, they knew exactly where there were a lot of trees, and they knew where they would plant more if they had the choice. But what we found through our modelling, so this is the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology that did this bit. So they found that if they planted, 1 hectare of trees, it would have all of these following benefits. So for noise, it would reduce road noise, which has an economic benefit of up to over £2,000. A hectare of trees, which is about a football pitch, I think, removes 97 kilograms per year of air pollutants, which has a value of £145. And it'll hold 5 tons of carbon, in tree trunks and branches. So lots of benefits from tree planting, and the noise and air economic values are based on European or UK guidance policy, and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology have got papers which report the full methodology of how to arrive at these economic benefits, the economic value of those benefits. So we found that trees are good, but we knew that. So the stuff I know a little bit more about is the social data, because I worked on this one directly. So what we did is we launched an online survey. We used an online survey marketplace to share that across the UK to gather people's perceptions of green infrastructure. And then half of them would receive information about the benefits, but half would answer the survey cold. And we really wanted to see if that made any difference whatsoever. And we had 1,860 nationally representative sample from across the UK done through the online survey provider, so they could get the exact numbers that we needed. And we collected 60 responses from our Rhyl sample. The Rhyl sample received the exact same questions in the exact same way, and with 30 receiving the information and 30 not, but we shared that ourselves because we wanted to make sure that it was going to just Rhyl. So I did that just through promotion on social media, speaking with the council. They put it in a newsletter, putting a poster up in the community library, And yeah, we got 60 responses and quite quickly, which points that people, are quite happy to share their thoughts about trees or wildflower meadows, and about, especially in Rhyl, we were asking them about Rhyl as well. So they were possibly answering because they cared about where they lived. So they wanted to answer that. Or perhaps they knew that things were happening by their local council and they wanted to share their thoughts. For the national version, we asked them to consider it from the perspective of their local councils doing the same thing. We weren't able to put exact wording in the same because it would be going everywhere. And what we see, so this is one of the tables that were put together from one of the responses, and the question was something like, would you like to see more trees in your area, or how would you change tree coverage in your local area? And the same question for wildflower meadows. And we see that generally, many people want more, both across the national sample and the Rhyl sample. A few want to keep the area as it is, but there's not many people that have selected that they would like to see less trees or less wildflower meadows, or indeed that they don't care. I don't think in Rhyl anybody said that they don't care. So generally, really positive responses to that question. And going on to some of the other things that we found, we thought that people might be hesitant to adopt green infrastructure. Literature has pointed to that people, they often can be quite hesitant or reluctant to see changes in their local area. But in our survey, we found that overwhelmingly people were ready for change, and really a positive perception of trees and wildflower meadows. Over 70% of respondents across all 4 surveys that went out. So 2 national surveys, one with benefits information, one without, 2 Rhyl surveys, one with benefits information, one without. And across all of those, over 70% wanted to see more trees or more wildflower meadows. There was lots of place preference. I'm not going to be able to get into all of that in much detail in today's talk because it is kind of a whistle-stop tour, but place preference was something that was important for people. So we saw that rural areas were the top place for wildflower meadows, which makes sense, but a bit more discrepancy between the least preferred places for certain types of infrastructure. I think nationally they weren't overall as so less preference for along walking or bicycle routes in the national survey, whereas in Rhyl we found that walking and bicycle routes were quite popular for wildflower meadows. So again, this localized response, which feeds into what we saw in Gwyrddni with, you can't just paint everywhere with the same brush. You've got to take these local dynamics, local discourses into consideration because people respond quite differently. But what we did find is that people in Rhyl seem to want more trees than the national average. Again, this could point at the fact that it's got quite low level of tree cover. But yeah, trees were very popular in Rhyl. What we want to do is more analysis to compare subsets of the national survey with the same index of multiple deprivation demographics as Rhyl, just to see if we can dig out a bit more useful data on that to see whether places that are similar to Rhyl demographically, whether they responded similarly or differently. We haven't done that analysis for this project, but it's something that we might be able to take forward in future publications. But what we also did, in addition to the online social data, was conduct in-person interviews with Rhyl residents. So we really wanted to gather their thoughts in person in a good session about tree planting and establishing wildflower meadows, and this was through a structured interview. So we had about 30 questions that we asked people to talk to me about, basically, and we just audio recorded that. We held them in Rhyl in the library, and we had 28 individuals come in to talk to me, and it was a random stratified sample of Frill residents. So we recruited them through the poster, which you can see on the screen. A Welsh version of the poster was obviously available as well, and people were invited to do the interview in Welsh if they preferred to. We had one Welsh speaker who came to interview, but she said she was more than happy to just do the questions in English. So that was fine, that was up to them. And these sorts of research projects, they can be quite tricky to recruit participants, especially when you're asking for an hour of somebody's time in daytime when I work, you know, so many people are in work themselves, not really the weekend wasn't an option because the library wasn't open either, and evenings the library was only open till 6, so the last slot would have to be at 5 o'clock. So it wasn't the most easy situation, I guess, for everybody to come along and take part in. But we had very little problem in recruiting the 28 people. We wanted to get 30, but we did run out of time to recruit the last lot. But so many people were quite happy to come along, and we did offer them £10 for their time, just for that hour, and I did bring cake. But the money wasn't a factor either. Many people said that they didn't want the money, but I said, please take it. So they would give it to charity, or they would donate it to the food bank cause that was in the library, or some said, well, I'll buy a plant with it now. They were a lovely bunch, essentially. Really happy to talk to me. Yeah, and we recruited some of them at the end of the online survey because they just left their contact details, and I got in touch to organise a suitable date or time. But some just responded to the poster, and yeah, we took it from there. So where were we? Yeah, and half of them received information on the co-benefits of GI and half didn't. So what we found is, they were, again, really supportive. I wasn't sure what I was going into some of the time with these things, because I don't know Rhyl that well. I don't know the people, don't know how they feel about Denbighshire County Council's schemes, but they were overwhelmingly supportive. There was a minority, so one focus group didn't like a particular wildflower meadow that was by where they lived, and I think one person didn't like a particular patch of new trees, but overwhelmingly really positive. They could see why Denbighshire County Council was doing this, and they really supported it, and they wanted to see more of it, essentially, with 100% of participants saying that trees improve the visual attractiveness of the area. 96% of them said that trees or wildflower meadows mattered to them. Biodiversity benefits were important to 96% of participants. But the number one benefit that people cared about was health and wellbeing benefits. 100% of our participants said that that was important, and important to them personally, not just generally important. It was important to them personally. That's something that I didn't expect. I thought when we when we identified the 9 benefits that we wanted to mention to people, I didn't expect health and wellbeing to be the one that came out so significantly on top, with biodiversity second, and I think carbon storage was near about 57%, something like that. So yeah, a big plus on that one, and 89% were interested in taking part as well, which is higher than what I would have guessed. So I think only 2 of our interviewees said that they wouldn't want to take part in one of the Denbighshire County Council schemes of either monitoring wildflowers, planting trees, or just maintaining them as safe and clean public places. And I've just put a couple of quotes on the slide as well, because they're really excellent quotes. So these are directly from 2 of the interviewees. So one's talking about trees and is just saying, it's just a no-brainer, isn't it? Plant a tree and you get all those benefits. That's how I see it. And another person mentioned wildflower meadows and how they mean more life, more animals, more insects, more creatures. It's more interesting, and as a reflection, we can learn a lot about ourselves just by observing nature. There's the benefit on so many levels. And just to bring these projects together, so I'm going back to the research question that I mentioned in the previous slides. So in the LCE project, we found that some of the key factors that motivate individuals and communities to engage for the climate is linguistic and cultural Welsh identity, the sense of hiraeth, and place attachment. And in Rhyl, we found place attachment again. Yeah, in interview, it wasn't just question answer. We had a chat off the recording as well, and people would tell me about, you know, where they grew up in Rhyl, or how this area has changed, how that area has changed, how there were trees in a particular patch before, how the prom had lots of flowers in it back in the day. In the 1970s, there was a, I don't know, sort of a greenhouse, I guess, in the community area with lots of different flowers, and they had really fond memories. They really cared about Rhyl. They wanted to see the place be as good as it can be. They really cared about, you know, the street that they lived on, the town centre. They cared, yeah, place attachment was really, really strong. And of course, health and wellbeing benefits, which I mentioned earlier, you know, 100% agreeing with those, which is quite extraordinary, really. So we found two things now for our research question, but I'm just going to finish on what's next, I guess. And I thought to kind of bring it all into the bigger picture. And I was just thinking about, because I've done some research into the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act before. I was just thinking about that from the perspective of the projects that we've done. And I just started mapping. I mapped too much. Mapping where they fit in, and if we just think about some of these projects and how they tie into not just one of the pillars of the Wellbeing Act, but several of them. So if we think about the Gwyrdd Ni work, they point out resilient Wales for sure. Their action plans consistently mentioned resilience, of course, globally responsible Wales, thriving culture and Welsh language, cohesive communities. So yeah, I just thought it's quite a useful task for me, in my mind, to map them across this. And it just shows that communities seem to get this bigger picture thing of how things are all interconnected. I was looking at the Penllyn action plan again this morning just to update my slides a little bit. And one of the things that they had in their action plan was green prescriptions, which again fits into health and wellbeing. It fits into a healthier Wales in terms of the Wellbeing Act. It's all connected, and communities seem to get that. So that's really, really interesting that, you know, people and planetary health have come out of these projects, even though there were climate projects, but communities can kind of get the fact that they're not separate, they're totally together. So more on this next, if possible, for me anyway. And that's it. And thank you so much for listening. And if you've got any questions, you're welcome to ask them now, or email me in Cymraeg or in English is absolutely fine. Diolch.
Wonderful. Diolch yn fawr, Sofie.
Diolch. Oh, it's weird talking at nobody, isn't it? Just the slide.
Hi, Sophie. Rhiannon Sima.
Hi, Rhiannon.
Super talk. I'm just slightly disappointed that you didn't finish up saying, and we have to consider how to pay for all this and how we weigh up what we're paying. So now you're with us in the Centre for Health Economics and Medicines Evaluation part-time. I'm really, and we've got a workshop on the 6th of February. We're really keen, because ultimately there's an economic question with everything. And, you know, one of the interesting questions that your real study that you could do, if you ever did anything like that again, would be people use willingness to pay concept to try and understand value. And I kind of like that, and then I kind of think, oh, that's really mercenary. But it's kind of getting to how people value a situation being improved. And so I'd be really, really happy if you have the opportunity to do something similar to this. It was such a great project. So thank you for hearing that. I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you.
There's so much more to do with our hill studies. Opened so many doors and ideas and things I had never considered, because we did the hill study before I'd met Rhiannon, part of it anyway. So this health and wellbeing stuff came a little bit after, and it came proper grassroots up as well, which is totally different to a top-down intervention of green infrastructure. But here we go, the communities are telling us something differently. And like Rhiannon said, if we'd have known, you know, health economics would have definitely been a huge thing that we could have added to that project, if only, I guess. But that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more in the 6th of February, yes, talk. I think, isn't it, Rhiannon, in the workshop? We can raise that, and I can give a link to that event at the end of this chat as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rhiannon, and thanks, Sophie, for the comment. And there are 2 hands up. So Sonia first.
Hi, Sophie. Really, really interesting talk. Just a couple of questions in regards to the first part, your first project, the community engagement. I'm just wondering, what was the representative, what was your sample in terms of the people that filled out the questionnaire to get those percentages? And also if you identified any best practice in terms of trying to engage, not only just engage people in climate talks, but actually get them to tangibly do something, if you like, be integrated in the process.
Could you clarify the first part of your question? Sorry, Sonia. So the representative sample, do you mean?
You reported on some percentages in terms of what people thought about incorporating the Welsh language and how they felt about climate change. And I'm just wondering how many people actually filled that questionnaire for you to actually get.
Yeah. I think it was about 200. So that was a cast survey. And I think it was near enough a 50-50 split between Welsh language and English language survey. I think we were on about 101 for one and 98 or 99 for the other. I can double check. Grant's nodding, so I think I'm not far off on that. So we had, yeah, about 200 people sampled from across the 5 communities in Gwynedd responded to that pre-assembly questionnaire. They're not necessarily going to be national. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, the questionnaire wasn't limited to the people that were involved in the assembly. It was open to the general population of the area.
That pre-assembly one was, yeah. Wasn't it, Grant? Yes.
To everybody in the area. Yeah.
And the second part with the engagement, we didn't find. I did lots of literature searching before this project, just to see what possibly is out there as a golden nugget to help with engagement, and there was nothing. There's lots of tools to say you should try this, you should try that, but there's nothing that really gives you the this has worked. This is the thing that will get the hard to engage to engage. But what I think we kind of found in one example is if we bring climate discussions from a different angle. So if we're talking about it, about care of community, you know, place attachment or the Welsh language, lots of people engaged. And I think I'm not wrong to say that some people might have engaged with Gwyrddni, not necessarily because of the topic of climate change, but because of what it was. It was a local discussion in their preferred language, possibly in Welsh, about matters that were to do with where they lived, and that included climate, it included their community, it included language, and it was all of these things together. And I think that really helped. I think more people might engage as a result, and I think there is a bit of momentum behind the action plans now because it's done by real people, not by governments or, you know, these important people that come and tell us how to, you know, how life is lived. It's just by that local experience that people were really doing things that mattered. I think in the Dyffryn Peris, one of the assemblies, I think it was the third one, I went to that one, they were just talking about, you know, how to take their kids to school and how to make that a bit greener and a bit nicer. And that's just such a normal thing, isn't it? It's not groundbreaking in terms of mitigating climate change, but it's a small action and it's something that was really doable. And I think that's how engagement might, you know, seep out a little bit, because then they'll bring other people along with a greener way to ferry the kids to school. But yeah, I think it's that normalizing it, and then it's not just about these big, I know, big things that we can't, these changes that we can't do. Not everybody can make big changes, but I think by making small steps in and bringing it into the other things that really matter to people, that could really help. But yeah, we don't know any more than that just yet. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, thank you. I think in my experience, what I've noticed, there's two sides to engagement. There's the challenge of actually engaging people in the discussion, and there's the challenge of then taking things forward, positive things from that discussion, and seeing movement materialize in reality.
Yeah, I think CAST have reported not too long ago about the effect of citizens' juries or climate assemblies, whatever you want to call them, that change is more long lasting than you might think, that behavioural change does come from that process. I can find the link for their report. But yeah, the positive things that were discussed in an assembly were kind of carried on a year or two later in CAST findings. So it was a bit more substantive than, oh, well, we're finished now, we can go back home and do what we did before. It does lead to a bit more change. So that's positive as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that to be fair, I mean, what DEG does and Gwyrddni, these community initiatives are meant to be long lasting as well. So they, you know, they've come up with the action plans and work on that for years with facilitation and all that sort of thing. I think we could probably discuss this for a long time, but we have 2 minutes left and we have one more hand up. So I want to give Rachel a chance to ask a question.
Thanks, Laura, and diolch, Sophie, and I'll try and stick to 2 minutes. One of the things I was wondering, and I know it's not your work, Sophie, but the model benefits you had on your slide, is that per annum or overall? Because that would obviously make a big difference.
I will have.
Yeah.
So I'll have to find that out. I've just been in discussion with Lawrence from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology today about our report and how we report those economic benefits. I will ask and I will get back to you, or I'll find the policy guidance and figure that out myself.
That's
but yeah,
great. Yeah, because I think
I know it was per hectare of trees, but yeah, whether that's a per annum is a huge thing. I'll find out and I'll let you know.
Okay, diolch. The other thing I was, couple other things quickly. I thought if you are looking at doing work in the future as well as deprivation, it's also worth considering actually outside space people have control over. So if they are living in flats, for example, rather than having any house space, you know, garden space of their own, that's probably something you'd already thought of.
Well, it's such a good point, Rachel, because that's one of the things that came up about the health or wellbeing benefits from the interviewees, that they weren't just talking about themselves, but they were fully aware that having a public space like that would be of benefit to families that lived in a flat or those that didn't have a garden. And all those benefits from having a space that people can go to was not one person mentioned that, lots of people mentioned that. Yeah, so really, and the way that trees were planted as well, I know we're going to run out of time, they were mainly planted in the east of Hill, which left the west of Hill more deprived. So that's again something really interesting, and that people told me that. It wasn't my research that found out, it was the residents that were telling me where these things were. So yeah, not just about deprivation on a higher level, but people can see it and they know what's going on. So really interesting. But thank you for your question.
That's brilliant. And my last one very quickly is I'm based in Ruthin, which obviously is Denbighshire Council. Yeah. There seems to be a disparity between councils cutting down trees and not putting quite as many wildflower meadows in. And I wondered how you were looking to use your research to actually sort of influence policy and make sure that what people in the areas want is actually sort of taken on by the council.
So our report's going to go to the council because our participants are anonymised. Participants have made, so we were only asking Rhyl residents, and I'm aware that, you know, so that's not a huge thing, but they did point out Rhyddlan and Prestatyn as having better things than they thought that they had in Rhyl. So that's in there. But they also mentioned specific places. So they mentioned, Brickfield Pond, I think one place was called Llysbrennig, that didn't have trees and or wildflower meadows, and then that should be a really good spot. And they also mentioned other places that trees had been removed. So it will influence in that sense, I guess, because I'll give them a percentage of how many people said these places out of our sample. And I hope that it opens more of a two-way discussion, that communities can work with the council to identify really good places, and then hopefully people would like it more as well. Right, if it's all been agreed and not just appeared. So yeah,
okay, thank you very much.
We're out of time now. But we can chat again, Rachel, can't we?
Thanks, this is great. So I'm sure there are more questions and more things we could discuss if we had more time. So thank you very much for a very inspiring talk, Sofie, and thanks everybody for coming and participating. And have a wonderful Christmas break, and see you again at the next PloCC talk. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Diolch, Dalig Llawen.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.